how you're gonna um, do that. Okay. All right, so over to Josh now. Josh, I'm very bothered by the way the work is presented. It's not, it's how yeah, because it's hard for us to see, you're cutting off this really nice drawing, I think, with the pole that's in front of it. And all of these things are large and they don't have enough space to breathe. So how about we do this really quickly? I'm gonna ask everybody to, I'm gonna ask, the thing that always weakens your work is the way you present it. And you have to think about, in the same way that you consider what you're doing when you're making the work, you have to consider how you present the work so that people can see it. If they can't see it, then it's difficult to talk about it. So look at the difference now. Mm-hmm. Right, so we can finally all see it, right? And and this goes for you all. You all have to think about presentation. It is incredibly important. Remember, we won't have moments like this when I will stop and say to you, don't mash up people's work. We won't have moments like this where I will stop in our crit and say to you, you need to, let's move this around so that we can see it better. By right, we're not even supposed to do that. It's a crit. The English examiner would not be, your English teacher would not come over and say, oh, I think you should move that word over from that essay in an exam. No way. It's done, it's done. And at this point in your development, you should already understand that presentation is incredibly important. So please, ladies and gentlemen, give the work the respect that it is due. Yeah. Okay, so there are quite a bit of significant changes in Josh's work. What do you guys think about what's happening?
I think it's most definitely a positive change. I think this is the strongest work I've seen you put out.
Why is that?
It's a lot more easy for the eye to look at. I think that has to do with there's a less flat clutter and more complex colors.
I think it's very texturally interesting because I know with a lot of your previous ones you like to have that kind of flat color, and with this, even though there's still some areas where it's not necessarily got all this different values to make it have depth, it still kind of implies it with some of the textures and the layering of certain objects on top of each other. I think for me the one most interesting is the one on the right, but I feel like the bowing of the wood is kind of working against it.
Yeah, when I measured it to put a new cross member in the middle, I didn't take into consideration that the corners are thicker because of the canvas, and when I went to put it in, it just fell out because I cut it too short or too long.
You need to pull that off and restretch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big technical.
I did try to fix it though, it just didn't work. But
yeah, you're gonna have to pull it off.
Is there some sort of, at this point, you need a middle stretcher when you're building wide ones?
You gotta build all of those before. You have to build. It's it's like trying to build walls around a house without putting up the necessary beams to support the walls. You're gonna have to tear down the walls to get back into the spine, because essentially that's the spine of the painting. Mm-hmm. So you have to build all the structural things first. You can't include it after. So you're gonna have to pull the canvas off the surface and rebuild the stretcher and restretch the canvas. And then after you restretch it, just spray the back so that it gets tight and so it does doesn't, what do you call it?
Get floppy.
It doesn't flop. Yeah, because I've noticed sometimes with your surfaces, they're not pull tight enough sometimes. Spray the back so that the sizing in the surface can like get tight. Yeah.
I like the center one. I like how the top of it, it looks, it gives the effect of mesh, like a mesh fabric over the painting. I like the effect that how you made those marks. Very interesting.
There's something nice about the background of that one, where you've done it's like the layer of like drips, and then you went over it and made it more subtle, and it adds a nice amount of dimension that a lot of your other paintings didn't have. And I think that your drawing is really interesting, and I also appreciate the fact that there are no robots.
That's true. Well, I think also too what's happening is that you're finally beginning to make a painting and engaging in the language that resonates with making a painting, thinking about color, thinking about space, thinking about temperature, thinking about light. And I think I think maybe what happened was the other times you would always do a lot of stuff. And I mean, I'm never gonna tell you that you're not to do a lot. I'm the last person who will ever say that. I will always say, in fact, that you need to do more. But I think what has happened is, I mean, you've still given us quite a number of surfaces to look at. But I think what has happened is you slowed yourself down. Both you and Josh have kind of done the same thing. You kind of slowed yourself, not Josh, you and Brad have done the same thing. You kind of slowed yourself down, and I think you become a little bit more critical about what you're doing. Because I think what was happening, while you were trying to sometimes collage on surfaces and so on, the thing about what was happening with the collages was that they never related to the surface. But what's interesting, it never related to like the rest of the painting. You never found a way to like pull those things together. So it just seemed like things that were stuck on as opposed to things that were integrated pictorially. But what I think is interesting, especially when we look at these two here, in terms of the way you're describing what would be ground, is that it kind of resonates texturally with that kind of rock that you were interested in. And I think there's my favorite actually of all three is the middle one. And I think what I really like about it is the kind of vibrancy of that blue. It's very rich, and it cuts into the surface in the middle of all of these very white base, these kind of pastel-y colors. And what's happening is it's creating a really nice moment of tension. And there's something about this little drawing that I actually like, and it has again to do with the kind of transparency that you're dealing with in the surface. And I think in many ways, these two paintings, the middle one and the outside one, are kind of informing each other in terms of the way each of them were made. I think you're learning from one or the other in terms of what else could potentially work in either. Which one came first, the painting or the drawing?
Oh, the drawing. I've
The
been
drawing
working on
came
it
first. Okay.
I've been working on it since like after the first critique.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that you've been working on that since the first critique, but everything else that you were showing us never had this kind of sophistication. I think I think that's something that you have to you need to recognize that sometimes adding is not necessarily the only way to construct imagery, sometimes subtracting, which is what's happening here, I think, in these last two, these two panels, is that they're very subtractive, while the one on the outer, the right one, the long one, is very additive. Very much like the way you make other, the way you would build up the surface in other paintings in some ways. It's very much about like thickening things. While these two, I think, become about like thickening and skimming, and thickening and skimming. Right. I think you just have to become more critical about what you're doing. I think that's the thing that's been a challenge for you during the course of the semester. It's just being a little bit more critical about the things that you choose to pull together. But this is definitely, I agree with your colleagues that this is leaps and bounds better. And I'm sure we all strongly encourage him to continue over the course of the break to explore these potentials. Because, like, for example, there are moments where the narrative still is kicking in. Like, for example, when we look at the outer one, there's these kind of like volcanic looking structures. And then here, we're getting these kind of peaks, like, it still it relates again to some of these things that we were, I think, in some ways still thinking about in terms of the kind of narrative spaces that these robotic ancestors kind of inhabit. But there's a refinement that's happening in these that certainly wasn't happening before.
Like, what I tried to do was take the robots out of it so that, like, it wasn't necessarily moved away from the robots. It was just not letting myself, like, rely on the robots to be, like, the crutch of the painting, so that I was doing, like, the like location that they're from without having the robots, so that the image of the landscape had to be what it depended on rather than the robots.
And that was really good.
Yeah, I agree.
I think it has like a very like prehistoric feeling. I think because like before you had like the actual pieces of like slate or something on it, and you've like done a really good job interpreting that to me. Than just like the way the landscapes are laid out, it still has the same like sense of time period that it was originally, but I feel like just executed better. And like I almost like it's more apparent to me this like that time period and the kind of more ancient civilization feeling than it was before with like the robots.
I just think these things are taking in an entirely different direction altogether. I'm not sure even so much if the robots and the archetype that you were hanging those robots on even really matter anymore, to be honest. And I think maybe what you need to do at this point is to just spend some time looking at the work and potentially, and also just making notes about the things that are happening here, and set up like the ones that you were making before, and have a look at that. You can go. And just have a look at those two things side by side, just kind of thinking about, well, what was the kind of point that caused this transition? One, what was I doing here that I'm not doing here anymore? Why does this work better than these? But I think all your colleagues are kind of hitting the nail on the head where the dialogue is concerned, where this is all going. But yeah, leaps and bounds better. Just keep working over the course of the break. Not on these. Leave these alone. Not on these. Work on something else. Okay? Thanks, John.